You don't survive death's design without waking something darker. The moment Lena Brooks jolted awake on the 7-mile bridge, gasping like she had been dragged out of the ocean, she knew what she saw wasn't just a nightmare. The fireball swallowing the bridge, the tanker erupting like a volcano, cars twisting in the air before crashing into the waves. It felt too real. She screamed for her friends to get out of the van, her voice cracking as panic took over. They thought she was going crazy, but something in her eyes made them listen. They ran back toward the start of the bridge, confused and annoyed, until the world exploded behind them exactly as she had seen. The bridge broke like a spine snapping, metal shrieking, water erupting upward. Their van was swallowed by fire seconds after they escaped. Relief washed over them, but something else lingered, an invisible shadow, a presence studying them. They survived, but not because they were lucky. Lena felt it pressing on her chest. They had interrupted death's plan. And anything that steals from death must pay the price. None of them knew the truth yet, but the countdown had already begun. You can't outrun something that's already inside the room with you. When Jordan stepped into the college gym the next morning, he tried pretending everything was normal. Music blasting, weights clanking, people laughing. Life felt too regular for a supernatural threat. But death doesn't need darkness. It only needs timing. As Jordan loaded the bench press, a loose cable rubbed silently against metal, a tiny spark of tension waiting to snap. Lena burst into the gym, breathless, trying to warn him that he was next in her vision. Jordan brushed her off with a nervous laugh, but his hands were shaking. He lifted the bar, and the cable snapped like a gunshot. The weight swung, the machine jerked, and a steel bar was launched straight through Jordan's chest, pinning him to the bench in the exact brutal way Lena had seen. Screams echoed, alarms blared, and the gym emptied in chaos as Lena collapsed to her knees. Chris stared at the blood pooling under Jordan, finally realizing this wasn't coincidence or paranoia. Death wasn't punishing them randomly. It was reclaiming what it was owed. And now that the first life had been taken, the pattern had officially begun. When death takes one friend, fear is a warning. When it takes two, fear becomes proof. After Jordan's horrifying death, the group stayed glued together, convinced that sticking close would somehow shield them. But death prefers isolation. Mia was the next in Lena's vision, and panic wrapped around her like ice. She locked herself inside her apartment, blocking windows, unplugging appliances, shutting off the gas. Every possible threat removed. But death didn't need mistakes. It created opportunities. A frayed wire inside the wall began heating, unseen and deadly. The electricity sparked, crawling upward like a glowing serpent until flames burst out behind her paintings. Smoke roared through the room as Mia screamed for help, but the fire moved faster than she could think. She climbed out the window onto the ledge, coughing violently, trying to escape. A sudden blast of heat forced her off balance. She fell, smashing through metal scaffolding in the exact twisted position Lena had seen earlier. The news called it a tragic accident. The police questioned Lena again, but the group didn't need explanations anymore. They needed survival. Death wasn't improvising, it was following a script, and according to Lena's memory, the next scenes were even worse. Desperation makes people dangerous, but death is always one step ahead. Ethan, shattered by Mia's death, refused to accept the idea of fate. He drowned himself in research, reading everything about past Final Destination survivors. Flight 180, Route 23, Devil's Flight, the Las Vegas bridge collapse. A terrifying pattern emerged. People survived the initial disaster, but death reclaimed them in order. Ethan believed he found a loophole. If someone new stepped into the path and died, the list reset. He hired a retired firefighter named Harris to protect him, someone trained to save lives and willing to intervene. For a moment, it felt like Ethan had finally outsmarted the inevitable, but death doesn't bargain. In Harris's workshop, a simple vibration loosened a rusted beam above them. A chain snapped, triggering a cascade of falling equipment. Harris shoved Ethan out of the way, fulfilling the intervention, only for the entire ceiling structure to collapse on him, crushing him instantly. Ethan stared in horror as the dust settled, realizing the list had indeed reset, but not the way he imagined. He was now last, and death wasn't angry, it was patient. Surviving a disaster is never just your story. It's a disruption to death's entire design. When Lena realized the traffic jam caused by their escape prevented dozens of other drivers from being on the collapsing bridge, her stomach dropped. It wasn't just 8 lives stolen from death. It was many more. And now the consequences were spreading across Florida like a silent plague. A tourist walking near a marina was crushed when a rotting palm tree snapped at the trunk, falling in the exact angle that mimicked the collapse routes of the bridge. A fisherman leaning too far over a boat railing was pulled into a sudden whirlpool, disappearing beneath the surface before anyone could grab him. A motorcyclist had his tire burst at full speed, launching him into the air with the same violent motion shown in Lena's flash vision. News networks called it a streak of freak accidents. Lena called it something else, spillover. Death wasn't just reclaiming them. Its design was correcting all the ripples caused by their escape. And the more Lena understood, the more terrified she became. Because if death was expanding its reach, then no one connected to that bridge, not even indirectly, was safe anymore. When survival becomes impossible, people search for control even if control is a lie. Tara, terrified of being next, convinced herself she could outrun the pattern by physically leaving the state. She booked a flight to Texas, shaking the entire time, believing distance equaled safety. But death has no borders. Moments before takeoff, a fuel leak triggered an emergency evacuation. In the chaos, Tara tried to run down the portable stairs, only for a sudden explosion of pressure to rip the railing from her hands. She was sucked toward the aircraft's turbine, screaming as ground staff shouted for her to stop running. One slip, one stumble, and she was pulled into the engine in a split second, the same twisting, crushing motion Lena had seen in her vision. The remaining survivors gathered again, shaken to their core. Ethan, now convinced he would be the final one left, proposed a horrifying theory. Someone must willingly sacrifice themselves to break the chain for everyone. The idea split the group. Arguments broke out. Trust disintegrated. No one could tell if Ethan wanted to help them survive, or if he feared surviving alone. Death had done more than kill their friends. It had turned them against each other. Fear can be survived, but paranoia destroys from the inside. After Tara's gruesome death, the group was fractured beyond repair. Ethan, now at the end of the list, started to unravel. His fear twisted into obsession. If he remained last, he believed he could cheat death forever. He surveilled the others, kept notes on their routines, and even sabotaged their attempts to stay safe. The breaking point came in an abandoned factory in Savannah, where he lured Lena under the pretense of sharing a survival plan. But instead, he tried to restrain her, convinced that if she died before him, his safety would be secured. Lena fought back desperately, screaming for help as machinery hummed around them. Then death intervened. A vibrating pipe loosened a bolt, which rolled into the gears of a conveyor system. The machine jerked violently, triggering a chain reaction across the factory floor. Heavy metal arms swung, crates toppled, and within seconds, Ethan was crushed under collapsing machinery in the exact brutal pose Lena remembered from her vision. Silence filled the room. For the first time, Lena understood. Death didn't need them to kill each other. It only needed patience. Some curses don't start with you. They begin long before you're born. With Ethan gone, only Lena and Chris remained, but something wasn't adding up. The bridge collapse didn't feel random anymore. Lena dug deeper into old news archives, ancestry databases, and historical reports on the previous Final Destination disasters. A horrifying truth took shape. Every survivor from the bridge shared a hidden connection. All 8 were distant descendants of victims from earlier Final Destination incidents. Flight 180, Route 23, the roller coaster derailment, the racetrack explosion, the Las Vegas bridge collapse. Their families had escaped death in the past, and now the debt was being collected through them. It wasn't about a bridge or an explosion. It was about unfinished bloodlines. Chris was taken next, trapped inside a malfunctioning car compactor that crushed him slow and violently. Lena was now the final link. Exhausted, grieving, and surrounded by fate, she drove back to the rebuilt 7-mile bridge. She walked to the center, whispering apologies to everyone she lost, and jumped, offering herself as a sacrifice. But death didn't take her. She resurfaced, gasping, confused. Then she felt it, a small flutter in her stomach. Death had spared her because it wasn't after her anymore. It was after her unborn child.